Hello everyone. Welcome to the 15th Annual Forever Green Trails Conference. This is our first time attempting it, delivering a conference in a virtual setting, so we appreciate your patience and grace as we explore this new territory together. My name is Mary Dodsworth, and I'm a Forever Green Trail board member, and I'll be helping to facilitate this virtual conference today. There's lots of people behind the scenes moving things around, so hopefully together we'll make that work. We're really thankful that you could join us today to learn more about our amazing Pierce County trail system and focus on how we can better provide trails for all. Equity, access, and inclusion are our themes today, and based on what's happening in the world and in our communities, this topic is more important than ever. I'm coming to you today from the beautiful city of Lakewood, a land of lakes and prairies, and I'd like to acknowledge and honor the Nisqually tribe today, as they are one of the many indigenous groups who have hunted, gathered, and celebrated in this area and on these important lands. This land, and all the land in Washington, is occupied land that has been stewarded by Native people since the beginning of time. So I honor these people today. They're still connected to these places. And I encourage each of you joining us today to find out whose land you're on and then to continue to share in these conversations. So now I'd like to introduce to you the Forever Green Trails Executive Director, Jane Moore. She's going to share a little bit about Forever Green Trails and get us started. Jane?
Hi, everybody. I'm glad you could all join us this afternoon. I'm Jane Moore, the current Executive Director of Forever Green Trails. Forever Green Trails' mission is to support a countywide system of trails through education, advocacy, promotion, collaboration, and stewardship. Our vision is a countywide system of trails that connect all of Pierce County's communities and major destinations. This system will link sidewalks and bike lanes, local pathways, and trails into an integrated network for safe, convenient, non-motorized travel and recreation. Our events every year include this Trails Conference in the fall, Trails and Ales in the spring, and Pierce County Trails Day in July. We're currently helping develop the Yelm Prairie Line Trail Project and Pierce County Parks Carbon River Corridor Cooperative Action Plan. We collaborate with and participate with other groups, including the Active Transportation Community of Interest of the Puyallup Watershed Initiative, Step It Up Pierce County, and the Leafline Regional Trail Coalition, among others. I would like to thank and recognize all of our generous sponsors that you're supposed to be seeing on the screen. We have a number of wonderful sponsors, and without their ongoing support, Forever Green Trails would not be able to accomplish our work.
Did they pop up for you, Jane?
I don't see them yet.
Sometimes there's a delay in the screen share, but I will reshare because we love these sponsors.
Yes, we love our sponsors, and you should be able to see all of them very soon. There we go. I'm really proud of everything that Forever Green has accomplished since I became the executive director in 2011. We've had great members of our board of directors whose time and expertise were essential to our work. But now I'm ready to spend more time enjoying all the trails in Pierce County and the rest of the country when travel's safe again. So I'm going to retire. Today is actually my last day as executive director. Larry Levine, who's been our project and communications coordinator and is our technical whiz today, is going to step into the executive director position. So I'm sure that he and the board will successfully continue Forever Green Trails' work towards the goal of a countywide network of trails. I also have to throw in a special thank you to one of our sponsors, the Foothills Rails to Trails Coalition, who just sent me an enormous, gorgeous bouquet of flowers. I really appreciate that. Thank you. So thanks everybody for being here and enjoy the program today. We have some great presentations lined up and we'll have door prizes later too.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you for your service. You've done so much in our community and throughout the state, actually, to encourage a healthy community and for trails. So we're thankful for your service. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Okay, everyone, we're ready to get started. My job is to help facilitate and to keep everybody on track, so that's what I'm going to be working on today. And throughout today, we hope to teach you and share with you and inspire you. So I'm excited to introduce to you two amazing speakers who will lead our first session today. It's titled Equity, Health, and Access. We have Brandon Gonzalez and Kaylin Henley. They're both consultants with the Alta Planning and Design firm. Brandon is a project manager and Kaylin is a planner and a program specialist. They both have years of experience working with communities to emphasize the importance of physical environment and also to create healthy communities, but also the importance of making sure that community access is accessible to all. So they're going to help us and give us a broader perspective regarding equity, access, and inclusion. So with that, let's take it away, Brandon and Kaylin.
Great, thank you, Mary. Let me get my screen set up in just a second. All right. Again, thanks for the introduction. We're really excited to be here today. I know this virtual setting is a little bit different than I think the past 14 or 15 years that Forever Green has been conducting the conference. So thanks for bearing with us and for still being here. And like I mentioned, Kaylin Henley and myself are going to be splitting up this keynote just a little bit. But one of the things that we just want to acknowledge a little bit is that we're really excited about the topic of the Trails for All and equity in particular. And we're really thankful for Forever Green Trails for really deciding that this was the topic that they wanted to kind of focus this year's conference around. And you know, the topic of equity is a massive topic. We could probably spend hours and days, you know, just kind of combing through a lot of the specifics and what it really means to each of us. We only have 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so, so we're obviously not going to hit everything. But what we want to do today is just give a little bit of hopefully an introduction to equity, particularly when we're thinking about trails. And hopefully, you know, for many of you, this may be an area, a subject that you know a little bit about. For some of you, maybe this is the first time that you're really hearing about equity, particularly around trails. So we hope that just at the end of the day today and at the end of this presentation, everybody walks away with something a little bit new and also some perspective on, it doesn't matter what role you have in advocating for trails in Pierce County, there's something in this for all of us, and there's definitely a mission from this that we can all apply to each of our roles in creating an amazing trail network across Pierce County. So, you know, why are Kaylin and I the two talking to you today? First of all, like we mentioned, we're with Alta Planning and Design, a national company. We do basically anything you can think of active transportation. And the reason why we're here kind of talking to you a little bit about equity and trails is because this is something that we have really been trying to integrate in every aspect of our work, as a lot of others are doing the same. And so we really just wanted to share a little bit of some of our own experience as we have been working on planning and design and programs works around the country. So to kick things off, something I just want everybody to kind of stop and think a little bit about is, you know, a recent really fond trail memory. I mean, most of us are on this call today because we are passionate about trails. We're excited about them. We get the value and the health benefits and all of the other kind of tangible and intangible contributions that they make to our lives. And as you're kind of thinking about a recent experience, this is a photo that I took a couple of months ago from the Burt Gilman in Seattle, where we had a socially distant Seattle office ride. It was a gorgeous day. There were so many people out. It was just a really good memory for me thinking back over the past couple of months. As we rode around on the trails, saw so many people out and about, happy people, getting out exercise, all different types of modes, different people. It was just a really great experience. Maybe over the past few weeks after the smoke cleared a little bit, you were able to get out in Pierce County on the Foothills Trail and some of the beautiful scenic views of Mount Rainier and just connect with nature. But there are so many different trails around our region that we are really lucky and privileged to have. And as you hopefully have that kind of mental image of a recent trail experience, I want you to take it a step further and think a little bit about what is the context of that trail? You know, what types of neighborhoods did that trail go through? What was the community like where you rode on that trail? And in particular, you know, think a little bit broadly about everything that had to happen in order for that trail to actually, come to reality. And the reality, it's not across the board, every single situation, but generally speaking, there has been a pattern of investment around trails that has generally followed advocacy. So some of the loudest voices, some of the people that really make trails part of their mission, but also money. And money could be from donors, but it could also be from communities and general neighborhoods and populations that have that wealth. And that wealth, and also that advocacy and those voices kind of combine to create this power. And that power is really what we have generally seen used to advocate for where we put trails, which trails are built first, and that sort of thing. And I mean, we could spend, again, a lot of time even on just this historic investment patterns, but the reason why it's really important to bring up as part of our discussion around equity and trail equity is because it's sort of that old saying that if you want to make a change, you first have to recognize that there has been a problem. And that there is an issue and a problem that we all have a responsibility to try to acknowledge and do our best to sort of mitigate and fix. And so that's where kind of this whole topic of equity really gets rooted into trails. For me personally, whenever I think about equity in terms of trails, it's that recognizing that there has been a disproportionate investment in trails in certain communities over others. And in particular, a lot of the communities that have been neglected, and intentionally in some cases, have been marginalized and vulnerable communities. And so whenever I'm thinking about trails, and again in trail equity, it's doing what we can to reverse and change the way we have historically approached trail implementation, to also give a voice to the unheard and to communities that have been historically left behind. And I'll talk a little bit more about kind of what that means in the next few slides, but I love this slide because it shows just a graphic representation of the difference between equality and equity. And I think it's really important for us to at least acknowledge that that equity and equality are not the same. And this image uses bicycles to kind of help just to demonstrate that a little bit. So you can see in that top example around equality, everybody gets a bike. It doesn't matter your age, ability, size, background, doesn't matter. You all get the same bike. And you can see how, while, in essence, we could say that that's a good thing because everybody gets a bike, it's not necessarily meeting and acknowledging the differences, the different backgrounds, the different abilities, expectations that people have. And so equity on the second or on the lower half of the screen goes a step farther than just saying everybody gets a bike. It says we have to assess and acknowledge that different people have different backgrounds, different needs, and we go and we try to provide or meet people in a different way. It's not a one size fits all. So in terms of trail planning and trail design, we have to also hopefully acknowledge that a one size fits all, a standard way of approaching trail design doesn't necessarily work. We also have to dig deeper into the communities that we're serving, the communities where we're designing and planning for and planning in, and understanding their needs and how they're different. So who do we generally talk about? Who are we generally talking about when we're saying, equity and disadvantaged and marginalized and vulnerable communities? Generally, there's a lot of different things that we can kind of discuss and talk about, but these are some of the main groups. So Black, Indigenous, people of color, age, whether that's a senior population or a young, children under the age of 18, income, particularly as an indicator for generally historically marginalized areas and communities, disability, language, transportation access, which could be vehicular ownership or access to transit, the basic fundamental ability for somebody to get around, gender, and a number of other things. And health indicators is one that's, I think, a really great way of helping to illustrate some of the disparities that we have and, kind of in general, why investment in trails in all communities, in all areas of our community, and particularly how investment in particular areas disproportionately over others has given some communities and neighborhoods kind of health advantages where it's left others behind. And so I'm going to turn that over now to Kaylin to talk a little bit about this health aspect and some of the physical elements and how those physical elements impact our or contribute to our lives.
Great, thank you so much, Brandon. So Brandon mentioned health indicators as an equity metric. And so why do we consider health indicators as part of equity in trails and transportation planning? Well, access to green space, to recreational space, to trails. Maybe they're providing an essential connection to employment or for physical and social wellness. This access affects our health outcomes. So let's take a look at this example of a life expectancy, a key health indicator, a health outcome indicator. So on this Tacoma Pierce County Health Department map, we can see that our neighbors may live as much as 20 years longer or shorter than us in literally side-by-side neighborhoods. Now you might look at that legend and think, well, you know, some of those are the outermost ranges of that age expectancy range presented here. Well, however, you know, if you look a little closer, then the life expectancy map shows us how at a minimum, some neighborhoods side by side will live, some neighbors who are living in adjacent neighborhoods will live 7 years less than another individual living immediately in an adjacent neighborhood. So how can this be? Next slide, please. Some people's first thought will be, well, you know, maybe it's because that person's individual health behaviors. Maybe they aren't very active or don't make some smart, you know, eating decisions. The social determinants of health, a public health model, proves that while individual health behaviors are a component of what shapes our health, these individual decisions are not by any means the majority factor at play. Our individual health behaviors can contribute up to 20% of our overall health status. But what if folks don't live in a place where it feels safe to get outside and be active, or where they can easily access a trail, or perhaps afford healthy foods? You're likely familiar with several of these questions. These determinants of health that I'm talking about are our physical and socioeconomic factors. Together, the physical environment and socioeconomic factors account for 55%, the majority, of how healthy we are. And when I say health, like, I'm not talking about like the lean, mean, grill and machine type of body, right? I'm talking about our holistic health, physical, mental, social, and emotional well-being. These all interplay to determine those statistics we see about life expectancy or other key health metrics like cancer outcomes. Another way of thinking about this concept of what shapes health is through looking at how health-related interventions can affect our health outcomes. This is where many of us come in, right? We're here because we want to make a difference in our communities. Through advocating for and changing our built environments, to incorporate more paths to recreate and get around, and to make these paths safe, fun places to be through maintenance. Changing our built environment in a way that allows us to then make those healthy individual decisions has the second largest impact on our health, second only to improving our social and economic opportunities. So we're here because we all love trails. We are committed to them as connections to economic opportunities, as places for mental reprieve, as paths to wander and spend time with loved ones, all things that support our health. For me, having grown up in Seattle, the Burt Gilman Trail was a staple of my childhood. It's where I spent time on the weekends with my grandfather, who raised me, and then it was also my walking and biking path later on in life as I worked at the hospital. So investing in safe, welcoming, and accessible trails and active transportation infrastructure shows tangible health benefits. Having access to and using trails increases our physical activity levels, right? It can improve our attention, increase our social connection with others as places to be with others at a distance right now, and help reduce our emotional stress. Let's look at some research. So people living within 2/3 of a newly implemented trail may engage in as much as 15 minutes more of weekly exercise than those who live just over a mile from that new trail. And just to give you some perspective of what 15 minutes is, 15 minutes is actually 10% of that minimum weekly adult physical activity guidelines of 150 minutes a week. That same person living within 2/3 of a mile of the new trail has also shown to get 45 minutes a week of physical activity more compared to a person living 2.5 miles from the trail. That's equivalent to getting nearly 1/3 of one's weekly recommended physical activity. So despite knowing these benefits, these clear health benefits, historical inequitable and underinvestment in Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color means that the health benefits, the ability for our neighbors to even have the opportunity to use a trail for their physical and social health and or transportation was never provided to them. And this underinvestment was done intentionally and strategically over decades. Public health practitioners have the data to show how this strategic disinvestment has contributed to health disparities in our communities, especially how these built environment investment decisions or lack thereof have contributed to health disparities, most heavily and disproportionately affecting those living in historically Black and Latinx neighborhoods. So if we have the data, and if we acknowledge and know this is a problem, then our question is, what do we do about it?
So thanks, Kaylin. That's just a really nice setup for and an illustration that we all know that trails impact us in so many positive ways. And I think that when we think about trails from that lens of health, and we see that there are very tangible benefits that activity and access to trails provide to communities, then we really have to be thinking about how our investment patterns have set others up for those benefits more so than others, as Kaylin said. And so that's the background, I think, a little bit on some of that history and some of that rationale. And if we understand that, and if we truly believe and see that disparity, then the question, like Kaylin said, is what can we do to change the way we've been approaching trail planning and implementation? And so I'm a planner, and so I like this, this quote from the American Planning Association that very much applies to what we're talking about, which says, "Planning for social equity means recognizing planning practices that have had a disparate impact on certain communities and actively working with affected residents to create better communities for all." So for us, that really means, I think, looking at those vulnerable areas and vulnerable communities and disadvantaged populations and thinking very intentionally, strategically, working directly with those communities to provide them the access to trails and to truly create trails for all. So one basic kind of analytic tool that we've been using quite a bit, and that a lot of others out there have really been focusing on using, because it creates sort of a quantifiable metric for us to start to think about our planning and design decisions, is an equity analysis. And I'll talk more in detail about the equity analysis in the last session today, but for the purpose of this presentation, this is an equity analysis for Pierce County. It brought in a number of those different criteria, or the different groups that you saw a few slides ago, from income, age, access to transportation, people of color, a number of different factors. And this is sort of that composite. This is that total outcome of combining all of those different things based on US Census data and applied over census tracts across Pierce County. And so you can see very clearly here that the areas of red are essentially higher concentrations of vulnerable and disadvantaged populations. Areas in yellow are where you have a much lower concentration of vulnerable and disadvantaged populations. And the interesting thing is, if you think back to the map that Kaylin showed, which showed life expectancy, there's actually a pretty strong correlation between life expectancy and what we saw from those health indicators, and also where vulnerable and disadvantaged populations live. And so again, we'll talk more specifically about some of the applications of this, but when we're thinking about where trails around Pierce County should go, when we're thinking about which trails should be implemented first, this is sort of a lens of looking at and evaluating those decisions to make sure that, in combination with a lot of other criteria that we use for prioritizing trails, we're also thinking about and incorporating intentionally where marginalized and disadvantaged populations live within the county. So I want to conclude just with a couple slides, just talking a little bit about some considerations, and then also some questions that I hopefully we'll all be asking ourselves the rest of today, and then also as we leave the conference today, some things that we should be hopefully thinking a little bit more about. So first of all, these are some general kind of areas that we look at and we think about when we're implementing and planning and advocating for trails, whether that be in your own community, across Pierce County, or wherever. But the first is really outreach and engagement. And the biggest equity implication that I can think of here is really about meaningful engagement. And this is something that, I've even been challenging myself a lot lately, because sometimes I think we can all get into a little bit of this habit of we are busy, we have a lot of projects, we have different things that we're dealing with at our jurisdictions. If you're an advocate, your life is busy. It doesn't matter what your role is in advocating for trails at Pierce County. We do get busy, but at the end of the day, meaningful engagement is so much more than going to a public meeting, holding an open house, and saying that we did the outreach and engagement that was necessary. Because I think that if we all look at our own communities and we see a lot of those that are showing up to these open houses and town halls, it's a lot of the same people. And quite honestly, time is a privilege. And so a lot of the people that are able to show up for a lot of our meetings are those that, for whatever reason in their lives, have the ability and the time to be able to show up. But that doesn't often include and disproportionately underrepresents, again, those vulnerable and marginalized communities that are not present at our meetings. And we're all struggling with how do we reach a broader group of people in our engagement. And one thing that I encourage everybody to do is to really think about your community-based organizations within your own jurisdictions and your communities, because these are those groups that specifically work with a lot of the vulnerable populations and groups. They are advocates on their behalf. And so sometimes they're a great opportunity to help to get word out, but they also can be a part of the process and should be a part of the process in representing and advocating for the communities that they represent. So first and foremost, I hope that I challenge all of us to really think more critically about what engagement looks like for our projects and what we're doing in our jurisdictions. And as we continue to advocate for the broader trail network in Pierce County. The second piece, moving into that master planning. So when we're thinking about the lines on the map and where trails across the county and in our jurisdiction should go, going back to the equity analysis and thinking about that as a lens, we should be incorporating that into our processes. And I'd really encourage us to do that so that we're also drawing lines on the map and planning trails that directly serve these communities and that provide direct access to these communities. So that we're not just thinking comprehensively about where trails should go in our community, but we're making a very specific effort to evaluate the higher equity areas or areas for vulnerable populations. Then the next step is really, if we define all of these trails that we want to build across the county, we can't build them all at once. So how do we implement in a way that is equitable? And this is where the equity analysis can also be incorporated into our decision making, because if we have the long list of projects, we always have these different criteria that we use to sort of raise certain projects to the top. But we could be viewing a lot of these through the lens of equity and trying to also evaluate and give weight and priority to projects that are located in areas identified as being high concentrations of marginalized communities. Design and engineering is that kind of next stage after implementation and actually getting things built. And this really comes down to our resources and funding and how we're allocating resources and funding. When we're thinking about our capital projects and how we go about prioritizing our capital projects, are we thinking specifically about giving weight to areas in our community that have vulnerable populations? Are we working that into a criteria that helps to maybe not raise that project to the very top because of a lot of other factors, but gives it a higher priority than what it would have if we're just looking at our traditional factors around destination-based or demand-based. And then culture and branding, I also think is really important, because this gets back into the one-size-fits-all. Trails are different depending on where they're located, and they have different users, and they have different needs, or users have different needs. So for some areas of the community, maybe it really is truly a recreational trail. But for others, particularly as we start to get into kind of the more established neighborhoods and kind of core areas of Pierce County, they're used for people to get to work, to get to school, to move around and accomplish a lot of their daily needs. And so they take on much more of a utilitarian role rather than just a recreational role. And those are important things that we have to be considering and designing for those users. And then finally, maintenance. How are we allocating our resources and how are we upkeeping or investing in the upkeep of our existing facilities and making sure that we're having equitable investment there as well. So I'm just going to close with just a couple of questions for us to kind of consider, as you think about equity in your own communities and you think about equity in trails planning. Is equity being considered in decision-making at my jurisdiction? Think about the way that you approach planning, prioritization, and implementation of trails. Thinking about Forever Green and the advocacy role that it's playing. How is equity being integrated into what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish? How has investment in trails been happening in my community? Are there inconsistencies? And I think that this is sort of a historical look back. Think about where your trails are located, or generally located, the types of neighborhoods, and then think about the neighborhoods where trails are lacking. And this could be different depending on what your community, composition is, but generally think about how investment in trails has been happening. What does equitable trail planning and investment look like in my community? Again, this gets into the fact that communities are different and it's not one size fits all. For some communities, it may be focusing more on certain demographics and certain groups as part of that kind of equity umbrella, whereas maybe it's not so much on some of the others, depending again on the composition and makeup of your community. But think about what that really looks like for you. How does my community approach capital planning and funding priorities? Again, this is kind of the main thing, because if we say that we want to incorporate trails in underutilized areas or vulnerable communities, the next step is we have to follow through and actually have some teeth for implementation. So that really gets into our capital funding and priorities. And then finally, do the loudest voices drive priorities and investments? And I think this is something that we really see a lot of. And for a lot of the advocates that are joining us today, first of all, thank you. We need more people advocating for trails and active transportation across Pierce County and across our region. And you have such a vital role to play in that. And so thank you. But I would also challenge those advocates that are with us today of think about some projects and some trails that are outside of the realm of your own neighborhood and your own area, and be an advocate for those too. Use your time and your passion for trail advocacy to the benefit of others as well. And I think if we kind of ask ourselves these questions and start to move forward of, how do we approach and think about equity, we can all kind of figure out what our individual roles are in advancing it. So with that, thank you for the quick presentation, and we have about 5 minutes for some questions.
Thank you so much, Brandon and Kaylin. And I really appreciated the comments you made about equity and equality, that they're not the same. I think that they get used interchangeably, and I think that was a great way to define that for us. And then also, Kaylin, thanks for sharing some of those personal experiences and how that has contributed to your passion for trails and trail work. So everyone, I forgot to mention at the beginning that we are going to use the Q&A button at the bottom. You can see that on the bottom of your screen. And it's a Q&A that you can ask some questions, or you could make a comment, or if you needed something maybe clarified during one of the presentations. What we will do is keep track of that, and we'll share that at the end of each presentation. We generally will have about 5 minutes at the end of each session to ask some questions, or to share some thoughts, or to gather some additional information. So, so if anyone has any specific questions for our speakers, they are going to be sharing with us at the end of the conference. We're thankful that they are going to come back towards the end and share a little bit more information on how we can take all of the information that we've gathered today and learned, and then show how it might be, how it was utilized, and how we can, again, take a look at those things. So at this point, I'm not seeing any questions, but I will, I'll just share that I was being asked yesterday, it's budget time, and I was being asked yesterday about, was this project a priority? Was this project on our list of priorities? And it's funny, we chose to use different prioritizations with a recent update, and we looked more at quality and at amenities versus just some of the traditional things. And so I think that the information you provided also gives us a new way to look at how we can assess our sites, how we can assess our impact, and what are some of the most important trail projects that are out there, and then how we utilize equity as a lens or as a tool. And again, it doesn't have to be like any of the traditional things. It's not the only thing to look at, but it is a accumulation of all those other things. So, but we do have a question. Let's take a look at that. Could you talk a little bit more? We have a few more minutes. Could you share a little bit about meaningful engagement, how COVID and some of the unrest that's happening and some of the racial injustice that are affecting equity? How are we supposed to, really engage with our communities? Do you have any best practices or tips?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And I think just speaking for myself and just kind of what, what I've kind of gone through over the past few months and just thinking about the social and racial injustice is my own, kind of approach to engagement. I think that engagement is something I've always been very passionate about. And there's so many different ways and tools that we have to doing engagement. But kind of like I was alluding to, I think that one thing we should be all realizing, and hopefully we're all realizing, is that we really have to take things a step further. And that the way we've been thinking about engagement, sort of these public meetings, open houses, kind of almost a checkbox way, which I know sounds a little kind of skeptical, but I mean, that's sometimes what happens. We really do have to take things a step further. And if we're going to be advocates for equity and social justice, it's incumbent upon us to do that. So, thinking about tools, one of the things that we have really seen work well over the past few months in particular is moving a lot of things to the virtual kind of online side of things. Now that does raise a lot of additional questions and a lot of issues. So I'm not saying that that is something that has totally fixed the problem, but we are getting so many more people engaged and involved by going through kind of these online and digital means. And I think part of the thing that we have to stop and ask ourselves is that when we do these public meetings in the evenings or, whatever, the traditional way, why is it that we're getting the same people that are sort of attending those meetings? And it gets back to that whole kind of conversation that time is a privilege. And we think about our own lives, and if you're working hard, just struggling to provide for your family, if you have children at home that you're taking care of, it doesn't matter. There's so many different circumstances, but giving people access to your project and your plan through those virtual means is huge. And then the second real quick piece that I would say is, again, looking at your community-based organizations. They are advocates for their neighbors. They are advocates for their communities. That is why they're there, and that is what they exist, why they exist. And so bringing them into your projects and thinking about them as advocates for the neighborhoods is a really, really important thing that we should hopefully be moving forward with. And Keelan, I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to add from just some of your own experience and work too.
I think that's a really great, thank you, Brandon, for saying all that and for encompassing that. I think especially right now, and Claire's question, talking about meaningful engagement during this uncertainty of, uncertainty is a word we love and hate right now. But also thinking about your food access sites as really key partners too. So I've had some really great success in partnering with local food banks or food shelters to get to share out about some information and to provide people additional information about new resources available to them or things like that. So that's also another partner to be considering, and also being mindful though that, we want to ask if we can share space with them in a safe way within the systems that they have for COVID and things like that, knowing that they're also super inundated.
Thanks, Kaylin. That's also relating to one of our other questions, was that we understand there's so much virtual connection right now based on what's happening, but a lot of people have limited access to technology. So I really like the idea of maybe partnering with our food banks or some of our other agencies that are really going right to the people. And do you have any other tips that might help with that problem with a lot of the people we want to hear from might not have the time that's so precious, Brandon mentioned, but also the access to technology?
Yeah, no, that is the quintessential issue of trying to understand how we, especially with the limitations of COVID, reach people without technology when we're using technology, as our primary thing. And I think the biggest thing is, again, using those community-based organizations, because they haven't stopped their activities because of COVID. They are still being advocates for their community, connecting with their community, and they're figuring out some different ways of being able to personally connect. Because that's their role, that's their expectation, and that's what they do. So it makes, in my opinion, community-based organizations and bringing them in as part of that engagement that much more critical.
Great. And one last question, just because we're running out of time for this, we want to move on, is someone had asked, what are the most important, maybe Pierce County trail projects happening right now that are supporting or addressing equity?
Well, I'd have to leave that a little bit to some of the folks that were plugged in with Pierce County. But one thing I will throw out is, and I'll mention this a little bit later, is Pierce County Parks has been working on the Parkland Community Trail that extends from Pacific Lutheran University down to the Lake Spanaway area. And this is a trail that is within an area identified by our equity analysis as a vulnerable community, and they are directly investing in it. So that's the first one that really comes to my mind.
Great. Well, we'll catch up with our Pierce County friends. There's several on the line, and maybe we can answer that question a little later today. So anyway, thank you both very much for your time and your expertise, and we will catch up with you a little bit later in our program as we move into our next presentation. So thank you very much for sharing that today. We're going to jump right into our presentation number 2. One of the things that Kaylin shared with us about the physical, emotional, social, and environmental health benefits, but we have to also remember that we need to survive, and so we have some economic benefit as well for our communities. And so we're really lucky today that we are thankful for Wendy Brown. She's with us today. Wendy's a policy director as well as legislative liaison with the Recreation and Conservation Office, also known to us grant writers as the RCO. Wendy is going to share the results of a statewide economic impact study that was done to show how the importance, trails are so important, and the outdoor experience in Washington and Pierce counties, our state economy. So we're happy to welcome Wendy Brown.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear and see me? Can you hear and see me?
Yes.
Yes, you're
Okay,
good.
great. I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully that worked.
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm so happy to be here. And I'm going to switch gears a little bit from the last presentation, which was really, really excellent, and just throw a whole bunch of numbers at you. So I'm going to be speaking today from 2 studies that we pretty recently completed at the RCO. I'm going to first talk about the economic analysis of outdoor recreation in Washington State to give the big picture of the value of outdoor recreation and its importance as an economic driver in our state. And then I'm going to speak specifically about the economic benefits of recreational trails in our state and hone in a little bit on the trail aspect. And like I said, I'm going to be talking about a lot of numbers today, but really my goal here is to show you what's in these studies, really so that they can be a resource for all of you to use however you might need to use. And I also want to say that I'm not an economist, so I'm going to be doing my best to explain these concepts. I'm going to stay at a really high level and speak about these economic concepts in terms that I understand and hopefully you will understand as well. So let's start with the first study and look at the outdoor recreation economy in Washington State. And the numbers that I'm going to be sharing with you were collected from 2019 data. So this is all pre-COVID data before the state economy took a major hit. And so it gives a good picture of sort of what a healthy outdoor recreation economy looks like in our state, and really can be used if we ever wanted to do a before and after, looking at impacts of COVID. This could be a resource for that. But what we found in the study is that the outdoor recreation economy in Washington State supports $26.5 billion in annual expenditures. So people are spending $26.5 billion every year on outdoor recreation related things. That spending supports 264,000 jobs in our state. And for every $1 million spent on outdoor recreation, that supports 10 jobs in our state. And 1 in 17, which is 6% of all jobs in Washington, are tied to spending on outdoor recreation. The average labor income of these jobs is $44,000, which totals to $12 billion in wages for Washington workers. And the spending generates $3.4 billion in state and local taxes annually. So the spending happens really kind of in two buckets. We talk about trip-related expenditures and equipment expenditures. And trip-related expenditures, people traveling to do outdoor recreation, is really where the bulk of the spending happens. That's 18.8 billion, and equipment-related expenditures is 7.6 billion. And you can see the breakdown here in the slide. And one other thing I want to say about this study and the next study I'm going to talk about is that I'm just really touching the surface of what's in these resources. I really would encourage you all to look these up. There's a lot of great information in these with great explanations. And again, I'm just, in the interest of time, going to just sort of touch on the high level pieces of information. So the $26.5 billion in spending translates to $40.3 billion in economic contribution in our state. And that happens really through kind of three mechanisms. We've got direct effects, which is the direct spending that happens when you go and buy a pair of hiking boots, say at REI. You've got the indirect effects, which happens further along in the supply chain. So the shoelaces that went into that pair of boots, the leather that made up those boots, those purchases were made before your purchase of the boot was made. And then you have what's called induced effects, which is the money that supports the employees of the REIs, the restaurants, the other places that are all part of the outdoor recreation economy. Those employees get a salary, and that money that they get in their salary then is spent throughout the economy. So this very simple graphic shows how the money can flow in the outdoor recreation economy. You have an individual in Snohomish County who wants to go clamming in Grace Harbor County. They drive there, so they're purchasing gas to go there. They maybe needed to get new tires for their car to make the trip. They stop at a restaurant before they check into their hotel because they're getting up very early to go clamming. They say they buy a hamburger at the restaurant. The beef that's used to make that hamburger is purchased by the restaurant owner in Grace Harbor County from a rancher in Grant County, and so forth and so on. So you can see how money moves through the economy, money moves out of the state economy, and there are a lot of connections among regions, among counties where the money moves around. The study of the outdoor recreation economy in Washington looked at the market values that I just talked about, but also did something where they valued non-market values. They looked at ecosystem services and what's called consumer surplus values. So the ecosystem services, you can see in figure 17, all the different elements that went into that valuation: air quality, water quality, carbon sequestration values, habitat values, so forth and so on. The ecosystem service values, they presented a range, $216 to $264 billion in non-market value of our outdoor recreation lands in the state. The consumer surplus measure is an interesting non-market valuation tool that economists use to measure how much people value something. So in this case, outdoor recreation is the commodity, and they use what's called a willingness to pay measure. So say an individual takes a trip to a national park and the entrance fee to that park is $20. If a person says, well, I would actually be willing to pay $100 to go to that national park, and my only expense is $20, that $80 is what's called the consumer surplus. And so these measures are traditionally done through survey, And in the case of this study, the consumer surplus value was $33 billion. So the study also has county level results as well as legislative district results. I'm showing an example of one of the county level results where we looked at, and I'm showing for Pierce County specifically, the expenditures within each county, how that translates to economic contribution, the multiplier, so it's the relationship between those two, the number of employment supported by outdoor recreation in that county, and state and local tax collections from that county. And you can see in Pierce County, total expenditures, only trip-related expenditures. The economists were not able to tease out equipment-related expenditures by county. But in Pierce County, it's $1.8 billion, which translates into an economic contribution of $3.8 billion, 25,000 plus jobs, and more than $288 million collected in state and local taxes. So quite a significant contribution there. The study also includes, and I don't expect you to really decipher this, but I just wanted to show that the economists included data by activity type. So if you were interested in what the expenditures, number of participants for a particular activity type, you can find that in this study. So the other study that I wanted to touch upon was the trail-based study. And this study looked at the economic, environmental, and social benefits of recreational trails in Washington, but only looked at non-motorized use and only looked at walking, running, biking, hiking, and backpacking. And the non-motorized perspective of the study, which was what was directed by the legislature for us to do. But I would love to see something, I would love to do something very similar for motorized trail use in our state. But this study showed 292 million annual user days of non-motorized trail use in the state of Washington. And you can see by activity what the most popular types of recreation were, trail-based recreation. And we also have all of the similar measures that we had in the outdoor recreation study for non-motorized trail-based recreation in Washington. So total consumer spending for non-motorized trail use, $8.4 billion. And I'm showing that relative to the study that I just spoke about. The economic contribution is $8.2 billion. And I believe that this number is not on a sort of a similar scale as the outdoor recreation study, because I think the methodology used was different in the two studies, whereby in the greater outdoor recreation study, there was more regional connectivity assumptions made. And in the trail-based study, there was more assumptions of leakages outside of counties happening. So really, I think the comparable aspect between these two studies is that consumer spending number. Jobs also, 81,000 jobs related to non-motorized trail use in the state. They also did an ecosystem service valuation and roughly $6 billion in ecosystem service values. And a similar consumer surplus study, 8.5 billion in consumer surplus. So high value, especially compared to all recreation, a really high value people put on non-motorized trail use in this state. One of the unique things that the trail-based study did was look at health savings, valued health savings from trail use in the state. And I'll speak a little bit about that in a minute, but that number came to $390 million annually in healthcare savings. And looking at the spending number, that 8.4 billion, the economists divided that out by local day trips, non-local day trips, non-local overnight trips, and then added that up to total trail user spending. So in this study, there is a breakout by county of annual user day trips to a county. So this includes residents and non-residents. And you can see the large number in Pierce County. And then it also looks at the annual economic contribution by county. And this one is really interesting to me because you can see in some of the more rural counties, especially on the coast, but also Chelan, Kittitas, Spokane, Whitman, Klickitat, and others where you have smaller populations, but you have a large economic contribution from trails. And probably in these counties where you have smaller populations, but you have these larger economic contribution numbers, it's because the people are traveling there. And like I showed in the example of the induced indirect and direct spending, you're going to have more of that when you travel to a trail than when it's a local trip. So this is the health savings part of the study where in very, very simple terms, the economists looked at the participation days by activity. This is annual. And then they used a modeled number of health savings. And so the health savings was a measure of reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke, several cancers, diabetes, obesity, and depression. And each of those values, that walking had a value, hiking had a value, was then multiplied by the user days to get the total 390 million in health savings. And these data were also broken out by county, and you can see the significant impact King, Pierce, Snohomish counties. Though it's interesting, 390 million in health savings seems like a big number, but it's actually 0.6% of the more than 55 billion that was spent in 2014 on healthcare in Washington. So there's a lot of money spent on healthcare and a lot of room for additional savings. But this is one means to get there for sure. And then lastly, there were some policy recommendations included in the study. Some of these are really obvious. The first is because trails are such an important economic driver in the state, let's build more, let's add quality of existing amenities. We want more amenities on trails. We want more people to use trails. We want statewide comprehensive planning for trails, just like Brandon was talking about at the county level, the value of planning and what it can bring. I think we really need to do a better job at the state level. Certainly bringing in equity considerations and many, many other considerations, but having a statewide vision for where we want to go with more trails in the state. Encouraging development of trails that promote multi-day trips. I think that the economic benefits that are provided by multi-day trips and more spending in the economy are obvious. Using trails as a health intervention strategy, I think there is so much potential around that one, just outdoor recreation in general, making the connections between health, being outside, just nature contact, but also the physical and mental and social benefits you get from using trails. And then lastly, the researchers identified some needs around better data collection for trail use. They did an amazing job with what they had available to them, but there's a lot more. There's a lot more room we can improve data collection on trails. And that's what I have for you. And I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for your presentation. Gosh, that was a lot of great information. I just want to remind everybody we're going to be doing a couple of things. One is that Jane has put this presentation, or not the presentation yet, but some of the links to the document and to the study in our chat room. We are recording this session, so you can have a chance following this conference to go back and take a look at the materials and highlight those things. And then we'll also be providing our presentations for download on our website. So there'll be lots of ways for you to go back and address one of the comments that you made. Wendy, one of the questions was, you did some comparison on non-motorized and motorized. Are there ways within this study when we go to your website to look at other kinds of comparisons like equestrian trails versus non-motorized? Or was that a research that you did yourself?
So the trails-based study only looked at those 5 activity types that I mentioned. So we don't have specific data on equestrian use or motorized use, unfortunately. I would love to do that. I would love for the legislature to give us money to do that. I think there's a big need. There's a lot more that we could glean from this economic analysis, including both of those areas.
That's great. And the other thing that you did show, and I think you should be able to sort by, maybe you can clarify, is that you said that the information is available statewide, but as well as by county, legislative district, and even activity type. Which those of us that are being advocates or working with our councils or our communities, it's a great way to gather information to justify expenditures, to justify planning, or even to justify cuts and ways that they're looking to reduce, budgets, because we are in kind of an economic situation right now that data can be so powerful for a local community to use. So,
yes, definitely. And if you have any trouble understanding what's in the studies, please don't hesitate to ask me questions. I'm happy to try and translate.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Wendy. We appreciate you being here. And again, we're going to have this links in the to the study in our on our chat box. We'll have it on our website, and we'll be able to address some of those various topics. You can come back to them. So that's great. Appreciate you being here. It kind of reminded me a little bit of, you throw a pebble in a lake and it just slowly goes out, and we have all that direct effect and indirect effect and induced effect and non-market, just so many benefits to our people and our community for this outdoor recreation. So thank you so much. Okay, folks, we are going to keep moving forward. This is going to be a little bit of a break between sessions, but Larry Levine is going to share with us some wonderful information about Pierce County Trails.
Well, actually what we're doing is we're going to have some information for you about some wonderful raffle prizes. And so we're very grateful to have 4 different raffle packages donated for today's event. One from DCR Coffee, a bag of coffee, a dripper cone, and some barista syrup. So you can start your day. Let's see, if you bought four raffle tickets, you could win these all. So you could start your day with some coffee, and then you could put your coffee in your Mizuno tumbler and put your hat on and put your Fitbit on and get ready for some trail fun, thanks to the folks at Feet. And you could maybe hop on this new town bike that you won at the conference and enjoy some of our fabulous trails. And at the end of your day, why not celebrate with some wine, courtesy of our friends at Wildside Wine. And now I have to share a different screen. This is the first ever premiere of a live yet virtual, hope it happens event. Are you seeing a little spinning wheel on screen now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, everyone who bought tickets, and if the names are, if you see certain names on that wheel multiple times, it's because they bought multiple tickets, and that's how you increase your odds. So here we go. Hopefully you'll see it, all the effects as well and hear them. And our winner is, winner of some coffee And who's gonna head out with a Fitbit? Maybe beg Jennifer for some coffee. Oh. You stole. Remove because, you know, once your name's out of the hat, your name's out of the hat. But if you had multiple entries, that really helps. So they got the Fitbit. Winner of a bicycle. Diane Evans. And lastly, the person we all want to be friends with, the winner of 3 bottles of wine. Is it going to be? Oh, Sue Nicholson. Congratulations. So hopefully that all worked properly. That was a little bit of an adventure for me to figure out how to do that. And hopefully that worked. And we recorded down all the names because I'm like a deer in the headlights here. But we, I think, have a couple minutes. No, actually, we should probably zoom right into trail updates, as a matter of fact, recover some of our time. So the second half of our presentation will have trail updates and 2 presentations, and then an awards recognition and special recognition ceremony. So your patience is appreciated, and your grace and understanding. I am about to talk very fast about a whole bunch of slides because there's a lot going on, and we're going to address things by quadrants of the county are these. You might recognize these from the long-range Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. It's not necessarily a comprehensive list of projects, and there's a little bonus video premiere at the end. I think we might not have time for questions about the projects, but if you put them in the chat or the Q&A, we'll try to record them and answer them after the conference. So without further ado, in the south portion of the county, the Yelm Prairie Line Trail, which you might be familiar with, is a non-motorized trail that will connect the cities of Yelm and Roy. And Forever Green Trails is working with the National Park Service Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program on a pre-planning project for this trail. We have just launched a stakeholder survey or questionnaire, probably, and we would sure love your participation in that. You can find that on our website, and you can also find it on our web page, on our Facebook page for the project as well. The City of Yelm has just presented their phase 2 grant presentation to the Recreation and Conservation Office, and you can see a recording of that as well on the Facebook page. So do join that. You can find that that Facebook page even via our website. There's lots of different ways to do it. And so while we're anticipating Thurston County's move to get across the river, we're also looking forward to the not terribly distant future when Pierce County will be hopefully designing and constructing the trail in 2024 and 2026 respectively. Moving to the central part of our county. Metro Parks Tacoma has a project in Swan Creek Park, essentially continuing the development and renovation of the trail network there. And they will be providing some additional recreation opportunities within the park, but also additional connections to the Pipeline Trail. And they report that the project is set to bid in October. So look forward to seeing some improvements there. And we're going to talk a whole lot about this part of the county because, as you likely know, the city of Tacoma completed a 1.4-mile segment of the trail between East 56th and East 72nd, basically to the city limits. So Swan Creek to the city limits with a nice asphalt path and little gravel shoulders, and there were also notably pedestrian activated signals at several of the intersections, and ADA compatible curb ramps were retrofitted and upgraded in the area. We also wanted you to know that the city of Tacoma is seeking some new, 4 new members for their bicycle and pedestrian technical advisory group. And Jane will pop into the chat information about that, because we sure would love it if some great folks stepped up to volunteer for that group. Pierce County is also doing their extension, phase 1 of the Pipeline Trail from where the city of Tacoma left off, and heading to Orange Gate Park, or through Orange Gate Park, I should say, with later phases as funding allows. In 2020, they were addressing conceptual design, and they applied for an RCO grant. And next year, we're looking forward to a detailed design and with construction in 2023, dependent on those grant funds. And incidentally, this fall, we're looking forward to public outreach around the Orange Gate Park master plan update. And the update is expected to be complete in 2021 and construction in 2022 to 2023. So look for that, and please do participate. It's really exciting when you see the growth of that new spine of trail out into the county. The Parkland Community Trail that was referenced earlier by one of our friends from Alta, and will again by them later in our event. Their concept design was addressed this past year, and next year we're looking forward to a final design coming out. There are discussions with Pacific Lutheran University regarding the alignment of the trail north of 129th. And we're also looking forward to construction in 2022. In the west portion of our county, the beloved Chambers Creek Canyon Trail gets additional trails constructed with design and bridges and boardwalk to be constructed in 2021. And I know I'm excited about this project because while the canyon is definitely beloved by everyone in the neighborhood, and I do live in a neighborhood adjacent to it, it's also makes for challenging topography for north-south movement for active modes. And so having the bridge across that, across the creek and across the canyon is really going to be a welcome improvement. So we're very excited about that. Penn Met Parks, oops, sorry, I should have had, yep, Penn Met Parks is, has just applied for an RCO grant for a extension of the Cushman Trail south of the existing terminus of the trail, and towards the Scott Pearson Trail is a section that they're looking at filling in. And this alignment will generally run along 14th Avenue to 24th Street Northwest, but will be routed behind the future Penn Met Community Recreation Center. And as I mentioned, they did have their RCO grant application and presentation recently. So we're eagerly looking forward to hearing from RCO on the several grant applications that different jurisdictions throughout our county have applied for. So no pressure on our friends from RCO, but you know. In the northern portion of Pierce County, we did want to mention that not all trail projects are the happiest, but they're definitely necessary when it's a repair. And we hope that you are aware of a closure that's happening on the Foothills Trail in a portion of it to repair the Voigt Creek Bridge that was damaged by flooding last year. So we are hopeful that completion of repairs and opening of this section of the trail again will happen by mid-October. the city of Puyallup reached out to let us know that there's an improvement to Van Lierop Park and the access to the Foothills Trail right nearby. Currently, the access, if you're familiar with the area, is quite offset. There's a trail leading out of Van Lierop Park, and really the entrance to the Foothills Trail is offset by a good number of feet. And so they're going to correct that and improve that. And they are anticipating completion of that this fall, and that'll be nice. The Bonnie Lake Trail improvements this past year included what's called the bypass trail to complete segments between 2A and 2B. 2A is that red section, red and white dash section in the lower part of the screen, and 2B is the kind of in the middle, that black and white dash section. And the bypass that's between them was constructed this year. And right-of-way is being acquired. They're in the process of acquiring it, and will, I'm told, shortly finish the acquisition of right-of-way for segment 2A, with construction of segments 2A and 2B happening in 2021 and 2022. Additionally, they are anticipating having a connection to their downtown happening from kind of in the center of the screen. You should see future connection to downtown. And there's actually, it won't be as pictured there, but they are going to have a stairway. So unfortunately not ADA compatible, but a stairway that will be parallel to SR 410 that will connect the trail to their downtown. The Tacoma to Puyallup regional connection is the next project we'll be looking at. As you might know, this is more of a recap of what happened over the past year or two or more. 3 routes were analyzed for their safety, connections, accessibility, equity, environment, community fit, costs, and also fatal flaws. And of the 3 routes that were evaluated, the alignment along the SR 167 project was favored. And state funding is being sought for the preliminary engineering work for this. That preliminary engineering work will then enable the further refining of the route and will lead to environmental analysis and estimating construction costs. So it's a process, but it's such an important project that we wanted to just update folks about that here. And another greatly anticipated project, the King and Pierce County partnership of Foothills Trail extension of this is essentially 2 segments extending the trail out of Enumclaw to the Boise Creek Bridge. And with the last 1,000 feet of this, the trail to be finished next month, I believe they had to pause that for fish reasons. And those are important reasons, but we're expecting to have the last 1,000 feet completed very soon. And the next segment, the Boise Creek Bridge to Buckley, including the White River Bridge, the permitting for this is very complex. And so our best estimates are starting construction in 2022 and estimating that in the first quarter of 2023 that will be finished. And that is a greatly anticipated trail. I'm sure lots of people are kind of slobbering a little bit, thinking about what a great connection that's going to be with our friends to the north. So a couple pictures from that first segment. And since we're talking about our friends and neighbors across county lines, we also wanted to talk about our participation in the Leafline Trails Coalition. The Leafline Trails Coalition is a 4-county effort to connect network of trails throughout central Puget Sound. And why do we want to do that? Of course, because trails are great. And why are they great? Because they give us among the most equitable, most enjoyable, and safest places to walk, bike, roll, however we want to be outside, and sometimes in the most affordable ways possible, and also offering us active mobility and healthy lifestyles. And today, they're launching their brand and website and also their promotional video, which we are going to.
Trails like these can be found throughout the Puget Sound region. You might even have one in your neighborhood.
Say cheese!
Cheese! They link communities and get people where they need to go. To school or work, to get some exercise, or to enjoy the outdoors. Today, there are about 450 miles of these wide paved trails in King, Kitsap, Pierce, and Snohomish counties. Now imagine if all these trails connected to each other, establishing an integrated network across Puget Sound. The Leafline Trails Network creates a safe, fun, nearby place for everyone to enjoy. That is the vision of the Leafline Trails Coalition. By connecting trails, we're connecting communities for a better future. And we have the support of leaders from all 4 counties. Together, we're investing in trails that will give people reliable, healthy, and fun transportation options. With Leafline, you can walk, bike, or roll to transit and use trails for your entire trip. Connect historically underserved communities to safe outdoor opportunities and mobility options to get where you need to go. Strengthen the local economy by providing jobs, world-class destinations, and easy access for residents, customers, or commuters. And improve community health by making it easy to get outside to enjoy nature, active travel, and exercise. The Leafline Trails Coalition is a partnership among public agencies, local businesses, and community organizations. We recognize that connecting trails across Puget Sound improves residents' health, strengthens communities, and makes it easier to get around. Trails support 81,000 jobs and add more than $8 billion to our state's economy each year. By connecting the network, trails can be part of our local economic recovery. Now, we need your support to turn our vision into a reality. Join the Leafline Trails Coalition. You could do it today. Learn how to get involved at leaflinetrails.org.
Wow, that was great. I love that video. I've watched it I don't know how many times, and it makes me excited every time.
Trails like these can be
Not
found
excited
throughout.
enough to watch it a second time though, so pardon us. That was the trail updates. And I'm relieved to say that it's over because it was a whirlwind for me, and I'm sure it was for you. And thanks for your patience while I whip through all those projects. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and I'll do my best to, if I can't answer them after the conference personally, I'll try to get your questions to the appropriate staff from the various jurisdictions. So thanks again.
Thank you, Larry. That was a great presentation. And I have to say, people were super excited about that raffle wheel. And so there, if you could also put in the link, maybe what platform or where you found that, because people might want to reuse that, since that's a fun way to have some fun with a Zoom meeting. So thank you. And congratulations to our prize winners. We'll figure out how to get you your great prizes. So just to stay right on track, I wanted to go right into our next presentation. We're going to be presenting Allie Tripp, who's with the Washington Trails Association. She is the Strategic Initiatives Manager, and she's going to share some great insights from her work and the success she's had in walking and talking, lessons for building better outdoor partnerships, telling us a little bit about how we can get more people outside enjoying the benefits of time in nature. So thank you very much, Allie, for being here. Looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mary, and thanks, Larry. And I think we were also excited about the prize wheel because we're just trying to break up our Zoom meetings. We're all in them all the time, and how can we do things more creatively? So I'm excited to use that, hopefully at WTA's Volunteer Appreciation later this year. But thanks so much for having me, everyone. I'm really excited to be here on behalf of Washington Trails Association and to share some of the great lessons that we've learned over the past 2 years through a pretty unique and exciting partnership that we've developed that I'm going to talk about. And I will note, I have given this a version of this presentation one other time where I had a little bit more time. But I've left all my slides in because I think there's some really interesting information So if I blow through something, don't worry, it'll be available to you afterwards, especially some of the research references and all of that. So yep, here I am walking and talking on the trail next door, lessons for better organizational partnerships. This is based on a trio, including WTA, Girl Trek, and the Pacific Northwest Research Station of the U.S. Forest Service. So hopefully many of you are familiar with Washington Trails Association, at the very least for our hiking guide or maybe our robust trail maintenance program. But we also do a lot of advocacy work at every level of government. We're really excited in 2020 to expand our outdoor leadership training program by opening up a new gear library in Tacoma, and to be building more partnerships down in Pierce County and the area. But you know, 2020 was 2020, so that was delayed. We're hoping it'll be open by the end of the year, but I'm happy to share more information about that program in the chat later. Other partners that I worked with on this, the Pacific Northwest Research Station's mission is to generate and communicate scientific knowledge that helps people understand and make informed choices about people, natural resources, and the environment. I worked with two social scientists there, Monica Darian and Lee Cerveny, who are really interested in developing outreach tools for the Forest Service so that they can better understand who's recreating outside and how to get more people outside. And then our third partner organization is Girl Trek, which if you've never heard of them, they're a fantastic national organization that builds active communities by inspiring African-American women to commit and practice to a habit of daily walking. And, you know, they've committed to that habit of daily walking to confront the health crisis that's facing Black women in America. 4 in 5 who are overweight. 1 in 2 Black girls are at risk of diabetes. And so Girl Trek committed to walking as the solution because as we've seen from so many studies, some that have been referenced earlier, walking outside is really good for you, both from things like heart disease and diabetes, but also for mental health, for anxiety and depression. And, they aren't just a walking group. Girl Trek is also committed to creating safer neighborhoods, supporting community events and efforts, and creating a pipeline of new advocates for a healthier and more just society. So the Puget Sound group, which started in Girl Trek, was started in Seattle, but also has a Tacoma branch, stretches across the Puget Sound and is fully volunteer run and led. But they do this work on their own time and dime to heal their bodies, inspire their daughters, and to reclaim the streets of their neighborhoods. They take lots of Girl Treks out on trail across Puget Sound, and that's how we got involved with them as WTA. One of their organizers got connected to us through the Trailhead Direct program at King County, and the rest was history. We've worked together a lot through our outdoor leadership training program and this partnership project. Girl Trek also supports community and community-led efforts in all of their neighborhoods. And as I mentioned, introduces women to the joy of the outdoors. So these are a couple of ways that you can connect with Girl Trek. I'll talk a little bit more about why you should follow them on Instagram later. So the 3 of our organizations came together about 2 years ago now to talk about our shared interests. We had been crossing paths at several different events for a long time, and WTA had worked with Girl Trek through our Gear Library and Outdoor Leadership Training program. But we realized that we had several areas of mutual interest, and we wanted to harness those and figure out a way that we could answer some questions that were of interest to all 3 of our organizations. So those shared interests that we decided on were creating a discrete engagement that tangibly benefited all parties. That was our explicit #1 goal, that this wouldn't be a project that stretched into infinity, and that we would all be concretely able to see how it benefited each of our organizations. And the way that it was going to benefit us was by answering a couple of key questions that were of interest to our groups. So those were: what motivates people to get outside? Where do they like to go and why? And what motivates people to join organizations like Girl Trek? And then what are the best tools for land managers and researchers and nonprofit organizations like WTA and others of you that we can use to learn about, learn from, and learn with different groups. And then, you know, we wanted to be able to modify our future programs and research efforts at all three of our organizations with the result of this engagement. So I actually don't have to do much of this background slide because the folks at Alta did a great job of grounding us in the current state of inequity in our outdoors. So I'll leave this here and you can review at leisure, but thanks folks for saving me a minute or two in my slides. So our approach, we decided, you know, this would probably be about a year-long engagement, and to answer these questions, we were going to take a couple of different steps. So we did several collaborative planning meetings to outline this. So it was a co-designed research project. Obviously, the folks at the research station are the experts in research, but you know, WTA had an interest mostly in just the partnership being successful. But then Girl Trek also, you know, we really wanted to make sure that their interests were close to the really foremost in everything that we did. So we attended weekly walks with the Girl Trek groups. They do walks every Saturday around the Puget Sound area, and attended several both in Seattle and in north of Seattle and down in Pierce County. The folks at the research station did some interviews with some of the leaders. And then we did 2 workshops, one in Seattle and one in Tacoma. We actually hiked at Swan Creek Park and used the community center for the workshop afterwards, and it was a really awesome location. And then we did a couple of spin-off adaptations where the folks from the research center went and attended Refuge Outdoor Festival, which is focused not just for Black women, but for all people of color, that when it was held in person last year, this year it was a virtual event. And we committed to sharing our findings, obviously with one another, but also with broader audiences like you all today. And then the last thing I'll touch on was the direct compensation that we agreed to for the Girl Trek as an organization, as a volunteer-run group. They get asked a lot to do things like this with organizations, and you know, the time that I was dedicating towards this partnership was a part of my work at WTA. But Trina, our organizer, you know, has a full-time job, and it was really important to all of us that we, you know, were equally financially supported throughout this partnership. So the workshops we ended up designing started first and foremost with walking, which was really important because I think when you're going to ask folks why they participate in an activity with a certain group, you want to catch them right after they've participated in that activity with a certain group. So here you can see us hiking just outside of Swan Park. Swan Creek, and then we did a lot of listing. So things like generating ideas about, you know, what these experiences meant to them, for answering that question of why these women wanted to participate in Girl Trek. We had them list out, you know, do some individual brainstorming, then share things all together, and then we did a lot of sorting of, you know, categorizing these different things. And you can see the top 3 results across all the workshops actually were, you know, sisterhood, which can be translated in some way as community, self-care, and fitness. And those are the values that Girl Trek already models itself after. So it was a nice reflection that their marketing really does accurately reflect why their participants come and join them. So then we did a really great exercise, the results of which I'd be happy to share more details of in a link, around what trail experiences Girl Trekkers are most interested in when they're going outside. So things like bus access, restrooms, safety, benches, parking, and lighting. And they categorize those into 4 buckets of critical, nice to have, doesn't matter, or avoid. And those results ended up being really interesting. And then we also did a mapping activity where folks got to put green dots for everywhere they had walked, and orange dots for aspirational places that they wanted to go, which was, nothing prompts a discussion like a map in my experiences through this. And then we also did some affinity mapping and sort of emotional mapping, having folks while they were out walking pause and write, you know, feelings that they were having on note cards, and then comparing those once we got back. And it helped carry some of that energy that they had while they were out hiking into our workshops afterwards. So our key findings and insights, we sort of grouped into a couple of different buckets. From a research perspective and the interest of groups like WTA who want to do more outreach like this, and the Forest Service, three key findings were: organized groups are ambassadors. So it's great to be able to connect to a group like Girl Trek that represents a specific community that you're interested in getting to know better or working with more. Safety is a real top of mind concern, and I'll show you a little more data on that in a second. And then that the right information is lacking. And this was a real aha moment for us at WTA, who prides ourselves on our sources of information. And then from a partnership and engagement insight and sort of what we learned about each other and how we work together, harnessing mutual interest was key. Learning from groups in their spaces is really important and great for that genuine community interaction. And I feel like the folks at Alta touched on that a little bit before as well. And then you want to empower all of the participants in the partnership with data. So I feel like I got into this a little bit. It was really great that we were able to connect with a group that was already organized like Girl Trek and, visit their different regions, because there were some differences between the walkers, the trekkers in Seattle versus in Tacoma. And then this is the data I was mentioning around safety as a top of mind concern. What is important when choosing an important place to walk? The feeling of safety was the highest ranked attribute. And you can see here attributes of walk locations that were ranked by avoid included highest ranked was busy intersections, and then rocky or uneven trail was sort of in the middle, and there was a lot of conversation around dogs, which we hear a lot at WTA as well. Then we have this slide, which I'm happy to talk a little bit more about. So that the right information is lacking. And when your concerns are, or when you're interested in doing local or more urban hikes, things like lighting and safety and cell phone coverage are not things that are easily findable pieces of information. And when WTA was reflecting on this data, our hiking guide that has more than 3,000 hikes across the state doesn't have that kind of information. It originated as a way to communicate about sort of more backcountry trail experiences, but how do we need to evolve as an organization to basically give the people the information that they want? And for someone to have the confidence that a park or trail that they've never visited is probably going to have cell phone coverage service, they might be more willing to go there on their own or lead a group there for the first time. So that's given us a lot to think about from our organization's perspective. Then I've already talked about this a bit, but just how important it was to harness our mutual interests and look beyond, so often strategic planning or thinking about what's next at any organization or agency comes from within. But I think it's really valuable as often as we all can to come together at conferences like this and learn from one another. Because we have, more shared interests than we think. And, when we focus on those, we can find really interesting results. And then learning from groups in their spaces. This is a really great quote that I'll just let you read from one of the Girl Trek leaders. But it's just really important also when doing this kind of thing to think about the entire social context. Experiences in nature and public places don't happen in a vacuum. That's a discourse that, some people think that, politics don't exist out on trail or racism doesn't exist out on trail. And that's just categorically false. And that whole social context of how people experience the outdoors needs to be taken into account when making plans and designing programs. And then empowering with data and how great it was to use visuals in the moment to prompt discussion. It was really celebratory when we were reflecting back on these maps, thinking, the women were like, Girl Trek is everywhere. This is so exciting. And then Girl Trek's big takeaways, specifically for them, they were thrilled to hear what was important to their walkers when they go out on a hike, since they're organizing weekly hikes, although they look a little bit different these days. And then learning their audience. They as an organization have a really ambitious goal of 1 million walkers. And so anything they can do to better understand what motivates folks to get outside was great for them. This food for thought question that I'll pose now that maybe you can reflect on later in your time is just, how do we engage in outreach, create programs, and build trails in a way that honors the intersection of nature, health, and civil rights? And I'll close with, there are several ways you can learn more or get involved with Girl Trek. I highly recommend, if you're on Instagram, giving their national account a follow. They're doing an amazing thing called Black History Boot Camp. They did one earlier in the year, and they're tiny little, like 10 to 20 minute lessons about women and Black women in history that you may not have heard of, some of which of course you have, but that you can do while you're out on your local neighborhood walk. And it's a way that they're motivating their audience to get out, but I've also really benefited from them. The organization is also always looking for new locations to host walks and events once public events are a thing we can do again. So I know Trina, their organizer, and all of their leaders are always welcoming suggestions. And then the last thing I'll say is nonprofits and governments should always, as often as possible, engage community-based organizations, but acknowledging that they're often overburdened with these outreach efforts. So harnessing mutual interests and compensating for labor are really key. So I will leave it there. Here are all our research references and everything, and my contact information. I'll turn it over. Mary, I think maybe some folks might have questions, or I can look in the chat box now.
That's great, Allie. Thank you so much. I loved this presentation. I really want to be involved with Girl Trek and the little girl trekkers too. I think that's really a cool program, and there's so many ways of incorporating that in our communities. There was a question, I think you mentioned it, but if you could just provide a little bit more information. You talked about meeting first of all, the importance of meeting the participants where they are, and that includes providing information that they needed. You talked about maps, phone service, and lighting, and that probably came to do with safety as well. But were there some other things that you heard from them that would be important when you're looking at maybe redesigns or adding things to your programs? Or
definitely. So some other things that came up were information about available parking, different options for, distances and loops. I think one thing we talked about a bit is in a lot of regional or local parks, there are any number of different routes you can take. We found this at Swan Creek, and we actually had a coworker go down and scout the route we were going to take ahead of time. So I think like suggested route options can be really helpful for people because, then they know it's a tangible distance, it has a time estimate, like that sort of thing. And then information around, I think, expectations about what the trail specifically is like. Like, is it gravel? Is it paved? Is it, rocky and uneven? Because some folks, that was sort of, there were women in multiple camps. Like, no, I'm looking for the single track, rugged trail experience. That's what I want. Versus the ones who were like, I'm not super mobile. I'm uncomfortable on uneven trail. So I think being explicit about that as well.
No, that's great. Well, we're going to wrap up our presentation, Allie, and I just want to remind everybody that she provided a great list of resources. She's done this presentation, and she's got actually, I think, an hour-long link that we actually have been given permission to have and use and post. So if this is a topic you're really interested in, we'll have that on our website so that you could maybe look at that on another day or share with some friends, because there's just so much to this particular project that you worked on that is so relevant to our neighborhoods. And so just about getting to the people that we want to serve where they are, not asking them to come to us. And that compensation piece, I think, is so important because especially with all that we're doing now, which is awesome, that people are really stopping, they're listening, they're trying to learn about how to work with individuals who might be different than they are, is that it can be exhausting. And so ways of compensating folks so it can really be a valuable experience for both, and helping them to be able to be involved. I think that's was really respectful and a great way of, again, building equity into your program. So thank you so much.
Really. Thanks so much, Mary. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, awesome. So everyone, we're going to zoom right into our next presentation. But as a reminder, and I've said this before, there's a lot of good links and data in our chat box. We will promote it and post it on our website, which is forevergreentrails.org. You'll probably receive a link if you are registered for this program with some follow-up information like an evaluation and some other things. So just want to let you know that all of this data and information, it doesn't stop here today. It's going to continue, and we're going to help you learn and grow. And that's a great segue into our big finale. We're so excited to be bringing back Brandon and Kaylin. They're going to be sharing some additional information with us today. And they are going to be sharing, I have my little cheat notes here. They're going to share how they talked a lot at the beginning about the equity assessment and how communities need to utilize these tools. Well, now they're going to show us how they use that assessment in action and how they used it to do a particular assessment and a study. And we're excited to have them share a little bit more with us. So Brandon and Kaylin, thanks for coming back with us and doing a follow-up to your earlier presentation on how you use those tools to actually make a difference in the Parkland neighborhood.
Of course, Hallie, it was a great presentation. This is kind of a tough one to follow, to go from hearing a lot about that awesome work to something that's more technical. So we'll try to keep it a little lighthearted. Let me share my screen real quick. All right. All right, so what I want to do is just shift in a little bit to the equity analysis tool. We'll just try to keep this lighthearted as much as you can be when you're digging into kind of data. But like Mary said at the beginning of the presentation, we talked a little bit about the equity analysis tool and how it is really just a tool, and it's sort of a lens for us to kind of think about equity and how we're approaching planning and implementation of trail networks. And so what I'm going to do is just give a little bit of a background, show a few examples from the equity analysis and kind of some of the layers that we do for Pierce County. And then I'm going to show you two different examples from projects that give you a little bit of an idea of kind of two different ways that have recently been used to kind of implement the equity analysis and how it kind of translates into priorities and that sort of thing. So starting off just with what the equity analysis is, it really is just a data-driven tool using US Census data. So for Pierce County as a whole, that I'll show you in just a second, we use census tract data, but we do have the ability to get down a little bit deeper into census block data. It really just depends on kind of the scale of what you're trying to look at and what you want to communicate and how you're kind of looking at your individual trail segments. So there's a lot of different ways you can approach it, but really the background and the root is that we're using US Census data in order to do this. So because it's census data, this is really something that a lot of your own jurisdictions and communities, you can do this. I mean, we love to help, but at the end of the day, a lot of what we're really looking at is something that is using data that is readily available to you all as well. And really what the equity analysis is doing is it has so many different factors that kind of come into this comprehensive analysis. And just think back to the keynote, and there was a bunch of different kind of groups that we generally are talking about when we say vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. And that's typically, just a couple listed here: race, income, age, disability, transportation access, and some of those health indicators. They can also be pulled in. The health indicators, just to note, typically aren't available with US Census data. Don't believe, but there are other data sources that you can use to sort of overlap and to bring those in as part of an analysis. But the point is that if you are familiar with kind of GIS, is the whole fun part about GIS is you have all of these different layers, and the point of you doing your analysis is to see where all of these layers kind of cross over and kind of meet. And that is really where the data will show us where the concentrations of vulnerable and disadvantaged communities are. Because there's a lot of value that comes from looking at assessing our communities based on race, or looking at income, or looking at age. There's so many different practical reasons why we look at a community or the county based on those pieces alone. But the equity analysis tries to be more comprehensive and take all of these different factors, combine them together to really get at where kind of concentrations of need are for us. And like I mentioned, this is a lens for us to look at equity as we approach trail planning, prioritization, funding, and so many different things that we do as part of planning and building trails. But it is not the all meets all. There are still a lot of other criteria that we look at. This is just one more important factor that we can hopefully be looking at when we are assessing planning and prioritizing our trails. So I'm not going to walk through every single one of the sort of inputs or the groups that we looked at for the comprehensive kind of assessment for Pierce County. This is just to give you an idea of kind of what that looks like. So this first example is represents people under the age of 18. So nothing really surprising here. Typically we see families and a larger proportion of children in neighborhoods and communities that are sort of in that suburban kind of fringe areas of our urban areas, and a little bit typically less so in some of the core neighborhoods. It's not always the case, but that's generally kind of a rule of thumb of what we've seen for a while. So this doesn't really, this just reflects that. A second, just kind of input into the equity assessment is no access to motor vehicle, to a motor vehicle. And so you can see here, it's a little bit more focused on some of those inner neighborhoods and inner communities around Tacoma. And then you do have to use some judgment, because we know that there's some urban planning trends where people that live, in kind of the more denser neighborhoods, they voluntarily don't have a car for a lot of reasons. And so looking at this alone may tell you one thing, but when really the value comes in when you look at no access to a motor vehicle combined with all of the other elements. So another input that we had for it, for the Pierce County equity assessment is, low income populations. And I should note that, red in all of these different graphics represents the higher concentrations of that particular group. And the yellow represents obviously where there's on the flip side, less concentrations of those groups. And so, and I also should note too, and to not get into the details too much, but we usually have some basic assumptions that we make for all of these different criteria that influence sort of the coloring and the concentrations. But, if you're thinking about a smaller area, your particular community, there can be adjustments made so that, you get a little bit more of discrepancies, and you can really identify and figure out where those needs are based on your own community. So this is that composite. So this is, I think, 7 or 8 different factors. I didn't walk through all of them, all combined. And it really tells you, based on the census blocks across Pierce County, where the highest concentrations of vulnerable populations are. And I think for a lot of us, it really echoes what we kind of know from some areas where investment's occurring. I know we mentioned the Parkland Trail a little while ago. It's actually happening in one of these kind of higher concentrations of vulnerable populations. And the point then is that we can use this composite to, as part of our trail planning efforts. If we're figuring out where trails can go, sometimes it is more expensive. Sometimes it is more challenging to serve communities where maybe you don't have a rail or abandoned rail or, open space or whatever the case may be. But it really kind of puts the pressure on us to figure out how we can make that happen and how we can better serve and provide access to vulnerable communities. And I want to walk through kind of an application of the equity analysis, and this is mostly for implementation and prioritization, because I think that that's the second really big piece that we typically want to focus on with how we use the equity analysis. Like I said, the first part is the planning level of figuring out where we want trails to go. And the second piece is, once you have all of these trails identified, how can we use the equity analysis and equity in general to prioritize which projects should be built first? And so the first example I'm going to walk through real quick is, this is from the Oakland bike plan. So it's not a trails plan, but it was a very recently completed bike plan that we did for the city of Oakland. And the reason I'm highlighting this one is because at the core of the entire project, the city really said they wanted this to be a total focus on equity. And so they acknowledged that a lot of the infrastructure that had existed in the city of Oakland had been built in more affluent areas and areas where there were more advocates and that sort of thing. And so they really had a very intentional focus on using community-based organizations and a lot of other things to focus on equity. So they have, when you're thinking about implementation and prioritizing all of the different trail facilities that we have, they used some of the exact same prioritization criteria that we would usually assess or usually use to prioritize. We're thinking about gap closures, which segments out there have the ability to, if we close that gap, generate more users and complete the network. You know, we're thinking about destinations, you know, trails that are located close to parks, trails, other places, or employment centers where people are wanting to go. There is a certain intrinsic value in investing and prioritizing trails within those areas. You know, paving plan, this could be considered or looked at the same as like capital projects. That if we have a trail that's planned for a particular area, and we're going to be doing a roadway reconstruction project because it's going to be adjacent to a road, then it absolutely makes sense. And there's a lot of cost efficiencies with doing and implementing the trail as that capital project is happening. So a lot of those are the traditional elements. But the thing that we're trying to focus on through equity is that if you prioritize your projects using a lot of those traditional methods, we're not necessarily, or it's almost a perpetuating, in some cases, some of the old patterns for how we approached trail planning and design. And it's not necessarily focusing on the inequities in the historic investment patterns of trails that we're striving to try to fix. So we want to make sure that as part of the traditional approach, we're also looking at all of the implementation through an equity lens. So that generates kind of those first phase of projects. So the reason why I wanted to use Oakland as an example is for this in particular right here. So they had a number of different criteria. I won't get into the details of how they assessed equity, but the main priority is that they were able to assess the distribution of vulnerable populations across their community. And as part of identifying priority projects for their bike and trail plan, they intentionally wanted to make sure that they were spreading investment equally across the community, particularly focusing on disadvantaged and vulnerable communities. So across the bottom is a bunch of different neighborhoods in the city of Oakland. The lighter purple color is the share of Oaklanders that were fit that disadvantaged communities assessment as part of that equity analysis. And then you can see that dark purple, basically the column on the right of each of those categories is the share of priority bikeway projects. And this took a little bit of massaging to do. So they sat down, they made a goal and said that we will directly invest proportionately in our community to serve disadvantaged populations. And we were going to make sure that the bikeway mileage that we're going to be building is proportionate to where those populations live. So this is, like I said, a very, very intentional approach that the city of Oakland took in order to implement the equity analysis. So this is another option that I wanted to show that is probably more commonly used. And I think that we see this a lot more than what the Oakland example is. But I wanted to show the example from Oakland because it is very intentional, and that was their primary priority for that plan. So this is where we think about a lot of the criteria, again, safety, demand, different types of demand. And typically when we're thinking about our trail network, we use criteria to sort of rank how those projects are going to rise above the rest. Well, in addition to safety and different types of demand, equity is also included as a ranking criteria. So imagine, you know, sort of a matrix where you have all of your different segments across your community, and they're given rankings based on all of these different criteria, of which equity is one of the main criteria. It allows you to sort of incorporate projects that are within disadvantaged and marginalized area in a sort of a methodical way so that it becomes just a regular part of your approach to implementation. And then the numbers can be developed from a lot of different ways. This particular case was developed through public engagement. So they had essentially the public and steering committee and some others sort of provide some direction and scoring on which of these were their most important. And based on kind of an average of some scoring and some different discussions, they were able to sort of come up with these criteria, and then they were applied to all of the different segments. And so this is a pedestrian plan from Portland that was just finished. And again, I'm showing this because it really focused on equity and is a good explanation or a good example, despite it being a PED plan. But don't focus on the details because I know there's a lot here. But I want to demonstrate that. So this is the entire pedestrian network of the city of Portland, evaluated and scored based on some equity criteria. The main thing to note is that the dark purple that you see, if you can see my mouse, over on the far right-hand side, those are the areas with the highest sort of equity score. Basically the really dark purple, and then also some of the light purple to the north and to the south of there. So keep that in mind when you look at the next image. So that's basically the highest areas of equity of vulnerable populations. So again, busy map, don't focus on the details, but the red represents your prioritized segments. Now, there were a lot of other criteria that went into this, but the thing that I want you to notice is I'm going to go back and forth a little bit between the two, is that you can see those dark purple areas represent the highest percentage of vulnerable populations. And it so worked out because of the evaluation criteria that I showed you a second ago, that a lot of the projects fell into those particular areas. But the thing that I also want you to notice is that the projects are not just limited to those areas. We have projects spread out throughout the rest of the community, just at a little bit of a different scale. And the whole purpose of that, again, is to try to bring us up, bring the entire community up to sort of the same level by prioritizing safety, demand, and equity as part of the evaluation. And then the final piece, just to demonstrate again, is these are crossing deficiencies. And going back and forth, you can see that, again, using that scoring criteria, a lot of the most unsafe crossings, particularly when you look at it and factor in equity, are shown here, and they fall directly into the area that was identified as the equity analysis. So there is a huge value that we have whenever we factor in equity as part of a data-driven assessment of which trails can and should be implemented first. And again, it's worth noting that this is equity becomes one important factor of several other considerations as we're doing prioritization. So just a couple quick equity analysis applications, and then maybe we have a minute for questions. But really, equity analysis is about understanding and knowing your community, particularly figuring out and knowing where vulnerable and disadvantaged populations live. And that allows you to be able to plan equitably, which is making sure that planned facilities that we're showing across Pierce County are serving and accessible by vulnerable populations, and that we're intentionally doing it. And then finally, prioritize and fund equitably. As I mentioned, with kind of a couple of the slide descriptions, it's one thing to show on a map what our priorities are, but we have to follow through and create the capital projects, seek grants, and do other funding sources so that we're focusing on implementing those projects and not just letting them slide. So just wanted to end with a quick reference to the Parkland Community Trail that we've mentioned before. This is Pierce County Parks is currently working on this project. It essentially goes between Pacific Lutheran University on the north. This is actually tilted so that north is to your left. But Pacific Lutheran University on the north down to Lake Spanaway on the south. This is an area that has been identified as part of the equity analysis as an area of vulnerable populations. And this is an intentional investment by Pierce County partially for that reason. And I think it's worth noting too that there are definitely complications when it comes to focusing on retroactively putting in trails, particularly when we're trying to do so to serve communities that we've generally overlooked and left behind. For example, this is a built out area of Pierce County, so there isn't a lot of vacant land to be able to use to put in the trail. So it is primarily using the existing right-of-way for kind of the side path for the trail. And so there are obvious complications that come from that. And it has become a partnership between Pierce County Parks and Pierce County Public Works because it is in the right-of-way. So, this is just to demonstrate that, just keep watching for this trail. Look at what Pierce County is doing here and acknowledging that this is exactly what we should be doing as we continue to invest in our communities. And this is just a photo sim of what that eventually might look like. So with that, I guess turn it over back to Mary if we have any questions or feedback. I'd like to answer any.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you so much. There was a question regarding trends because neighborhoods change over the years or over long periods of time, especially if an area hasn't been program for a while. So are there any ways that you incorporate that into the decision-making process?
So I think that's a great question. The first thing that I would note about that is that what we're trying to do, it kind of gets back to the foundation of what we're trying to do. We are trying to intentionally invest in vulnerable communities. But the reason why we're needing to intentionally invest in marginalized communities is because they have generally been overlooked for infrastructure. So if, as our goal, regardless of what your background, where you're coming from is we would love to have a comprehensive trail network for our community and for Pierce County. So we are technically working towards that goal of the comprehensive network. We're just simply investing in areas that have been left behind. So as trends change, in theory, as we continue to create that comprehensive network, no matter where you live across Pierce County or in your community, you're going to have that access to trails. We're simply just trying to rectify and add trails as a priority into areas that have been overlooked. So I hope that sort of gets at the question of trends, which is, you know, an area that is identified as a vulnerable population now through the gentrification or a lot of other factors may change over time. And those changes can be very quick and rapid, but sometimes they also can just evolve over time. But we're really just trying to you know, prioritize how we're making that comprehensive network.
That's great. Such great information. Thank you, Brandon and Alta, for supporting us at this conference. And I'm sure that Brandon and Caitlin and other folks there would be happy to chat with people on this conference who are interested in learning more about what they did or some of the tools that they've used. I think the thing that you said, Brandon, that was so meaningful to me is about being intentional. You know, that traditional methods haven't always worked. Sometimes using one data set hasn't worked, that really being intentional with your assessments, your partnerships, your investments, and your advocacy, that it will make a difference. Sometimes it seems impossible, especially in those, you know, built out areas, and some of those traditional areas are, in City of Lakewood, we have that same issue, 95% built out, but it's not impossible. It just takes time and effort and being intentional, and we can make it happen. And Forever Green
Absolutely
about that. And so thanks, Brendan, for your time. And we're going to move right into awards and recognition. And I'm going to give the spotlight back to Larry. He did a great job with our Pierce County Trails, and now he's going to talk about some people that have done great things regarding our mission and our effort. And so, Larry, thanks for focusing on the awards and sharing these great agencies and organizations with our community.
Well, glad to be back here, and especially because, you know, our Trail Awards do just that. They recognize folks who've done great work, and we have several categories in which we recognize folks and institutions and agencies. This year, we have 3 awards to announce. And in order that you're seeing them in those bullets there, we'd first like to recognize Mr. Blake Gahan. And Blake is a resident of University Place, has a BA in Urban Studies from UW-Tacoma. So, you know, good local guy, transportation accessibility advocate, and self-described rail fan, which is evident from all of his social media pictures, seem to have trains or train tracks in the background. And so we can see he's got a lot of love for mobility. But we're recognizing Blake because of his work around accessibility and the ability to vote. So some people with disabilities cannot vote privately via paper ballots and rely on accessible voting machines at election centers in order to cast their ballots. Disability Rights Washington reported on the barrier of missing sidewalks in its 2010 election accessibility report. And among the problem sites it mentioned was the Pierce County Elections Office on South 35th in Tacoma. So both the county and the city were aware of the issue, yet the problem persisted for several years. Enter Blake. He made a video highlighting this problem that has over 16,000 views on Twitter and was also featured in by the News Tribune last November. after the attention from this video, the city of Tacoma made improvements needed to make the election center truly accessible. And this will be the first election that disabled voters will be able to use this new access point. And so while we are thinking about trails more broadly and accessibility more broadly and inclusion more broadly, we're also going to think of the Trail Award more broadly. And we are congratulating Blake and awarding him with the Campaign Trail Award. We're really looking forward to working with him in the future. He's already been helpful to me in my work with Forever Green Trails in consulting about accessibility issues in our countywide trails network. So thank you so much, Blake. Great work and congratulations. Our next Trail Award winner is the City of Pacific for their extension of the Interurban Trail. This is a long-awaited for trail project, not just by the folks in Pacific, but everyone around them, especially those of us to the south. This is an extension of the Interurban Trail that stretches all the way from Tukwila down to and now through Pacific. It's part of the connection to another connection to King and Pierce County. And as you can see from the pictures, its route heads all the way to Stewart Road, also known as 8th Avenue, 8th Street East by some of our friends in Sumner. And it sets up a connection to the Sumner Link Trail, which incidentally we are led to believe and are hopeful that will happen by 2025, 2026 when they do their work on 8th Street in Stewart and replace the bridge. And so think about that. By 2026, we could have 2 trail connections between Pierce and King counties, this one and the one in the Enumclaw portion of the Foothills Trail. The City of Pacific is really owed some recognition for their leadership in extending the trail and also for the habitat restoration that was part of it. You can now see green herons along the trail, and I believe salmon have been seen in the Milwaukee Ditch. It's part of the, partially, I'm guessing, due to the restoration of the habitat along that, the former creek, now kind of channelized ditch. But it's been in the works for quite a long time and involved efforts from all over the region, their legislators, and also a lot of volunteer labor. And they completed this extension in May 2020 and was immediately popular and just a beautiful trail, and have just a few pictures for you. I really encourage you to go and enjoy it. It was part of a lovely ride we took on the Foothills and Sumner Link Trail and Interurban Trail all the way up to Kent. It was great. And you can even go beyond, but we ran out of time, so we had to turn around. We'd like to thank heartily the City of Pacific, the elected officials who've been working on this for a long time, and the city staff as well who were involved, and also the people of Pacific who have supported this trail through all the years. And we also want to acknowledge that they are preparing to pass a complete streets ordinance as well, with a first reading either having just happened or about to happen. So a big congratulations to the City of Pacific. And we're just so pleased to see the extension of the Interurban Trail. Now onto the Sumner Link Trail, right? Our last trail award goes to a non-governmental group. The ETC, the East Tacoma Collaborative, is a group of agencies and grassroots organizations addressing concerns in the east side of Tacoma and directed by a community leadership team. Several ETC members organized a week-long cleanup event in Swan Creek Park that culminated on Pierce County Trails Day. And we have a few pictures of the work that was done by their amazing volunteers. And you can see a lot of this is in the riparian area, removing really both a lot of refuse, large in terms of the overall weight, sometimes gigantic in size and requiring a lot of teamwork. And we're super grateful for all of the work that they did in removing this garbage. from the park. The results of their event was that they removed over 1,600 pounds of garbage from Swan Creek Park. That's a huge contribution on the part of the event organizers, all of the supporting organizations that you saw in an earlier slide, and we thank them from the bottom of our hearts. It's that kind of stewardship that is necessary for the care and love of our public lands. And it also, I think, sends a signal to folks at the park to take care of the park. So even just by being out there and doing the stewardship, you also broadcast the stewardship message to folks. So we'd like to present the East Tacoma Collaborative with an award for outstanding project of their Swan Creek Park cleanup in 2020. And those are our trail awards this year. But we have a special recognition that we would like to make. And so if I could introduce to you our board president, Terry Reed. Terry, if you can turn on your mic and your video, please.
Yes, I think I'm all hooked up here.
Okay.
So thank you, Larry, for those presenting those wonderful awards. I have the honor of giving special recognition to Dr. Jane Moore. Jane, as you probably heard, is retiring. This is her last official day as executive director with Forever Green Trails. And she deserves some special recognition because she's done some really special things over the years. She's been with us for 14 years, started with the board in 2006, served as vice president, and then a couple of years as president, and then as executive director for the past 9 years. So she has been with us and done a great deal of things during this time. I've served on the board since 2013, and I've come to really appreciate the importance of what she has done and the evolution that she's created for Forever Green Trails. She has created so many partnerships within our community, both in the active transportation community, across various park jurisdictions in Pierce County, and with the other players within the region of the Puget Sound area. And so Jane's leadership has been essential to us and will be greatly missed. But I'm very pleased to report that she's not going to be leaving Forever Green Trails officially. She will be part of the board again starting in October. So thank you, Jane, for making yourself available for that. Now, Jane, now that she's going to be fully retired, one of her lifelong ambitions, along with her husband, Hugh, is to visit every single national park in the country. And I think they're over half the way through that already. And so we got you a little gift, Jane, that's going to be commensurate with that goal. We have a 2,000-piece jigsaw puzzle that commemorates all the national parks in the United States. And so as you're traveling about, you can be our official Forever Green Trails ambassador to these national parks. But when you're stuck at home, you can be working on this 2,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, because I think it'll take a while. You also have a gift card from REI, so you can get some new stylish travel gear. So you're all set up for retirement. There's been one other person who's asked to note Jane's retirement and give some recognition. Dixie Gatchell is going to join us for a moment. Hello, Dixie.
Dixie, can you unmute?
Dixie, can you unmute? Here she is.
Hi. Well, Jane, I am so happy that you're having an opportunity to retire and you're going out in a blaze of glory, because absolutely, and I've been to so many Zoomers in the last, since March, and this is absolutely the best Zoom conference that I've been to, and everyone has just given so much information out that we really know. And I know our friendship goes back a lot of years because I first met you when you were a volunteer physician at one of our early Rainier to Ruston relays. So I'm just so glad that the bouquet arrived in one piece and in a timely basis. And I just wish you the best for everything to come. And thank you for all that you've done to help us get our trail all the way from Mount Rainier to Point Defiance, Tacoma, and all points south, east, north, and west. So love you, girl. And a virtual hug.
Thank you, Dixie. That's a very, very warm message you have given us. So I'm going to close it out now, and I want to thank everybody for being part of our first virtual Trails Conference. I think it's been quite successful, and I want to give special recognition to Larry Levine for being sort of the person who's made it all work and created the format for giving us this opportunity to have a conference this year. All the conference presentations and materials will be available on the forevergreen.org website within a short period of time. And looking ahead to 2001, I just wanted to draw your attention that we're going to be starting a new program that will be the Trail Scorecard Program. This trail will help jurisdictions evaluate their trail planning for consistency with the regional trails plan, connectivity with adjacent jurisdictions, and consistency with the countywide standards being developed. We're hoping to roll out the Trail Scorecard Program in the spring next year at the Trails and Ales event, so stay tuned for those details. I'd also like to mention one other thing. If you are a trail supporter and like some of the things that Forever Green Trails is doing, please consider having a conversation with us about becoming a board member. It's an effective way in this rather challenging time that we're in right now of being part of a good cause and feeling more connected to our community. So please consider joining our board. Just one last thing, please to stay connected with Forever Green Trails, you can check for updates on our website. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And so having said all that, I just want to thank you all again for being part of the conference today and say, stay safe and happy trails, everybody.